Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Food Buying Guide webinar presented today by our Child Nutrition Office. And of course, we already have a glitch.
Sometimes it locks up on that first one. Let me just hit over here one time. Sure as I hit it, sometimes it goes ahead and advances. Hit one more time for me.
There we go. We're going to talk about the Food Buying Guide in a little bit of detail, but first I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Dana Parker. I'm the Director of Training here at the Child Nutrition Programs at the State Department. And as you see on the screen, I've got the Buy American requirement. I just wanted to bring that out. That is in one of the first pages in the Food Buying Guide to make sure our child nutrition, national school lunch, and school breakfast folks realize that they have to include this Buy American provision in their procurement information, but it does not apply to the people in the CACFP or the summer food service programs. But what Buy American or the Buy American requirement is that the provision requires that school food authorities purchase to the maximum extent practical domestic commodities or products. The term domestic commodity or product means an agricultural commodity that is produced in the United States or a food product that is processed in the United States, substantially using agricultural commodities that are produced in the U.S. The definition of substantially means that over 51% of the final processed products consist of agricultural commodities grown domestically or grown within the United States or its territories. And there are a few exceptions that you can have on the Buy American, as if the cost is too prohibitive, or if it's just not available in the United States or one of the territories. Just wanted to bring that out as a little bit of a reminder as the Food Buying Guide is talking about purchasing products for our schools. What we're going to cover today on the Food Buying Guide is we're going to look at a little bit of the history of the Food Buying Guide. We're going to look at the contents, the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the Food Buying Guide, and how to use the Food Buying Guide. And we're going to make sure everybody understands that you can still get the Food Buying Guide in a book, paper version. You can actually go online and use the online version of the Food Buying Guide by setting up a username and password, and that will help you save some favorites where you do not have to maybe look for items like you would in the paper documents. And also there is a mobile application that you can download the Food Buying Guide on your mobile phone. When you're looking for the Food Buying Guide online, if you go into the Food and Nutrition Services or FNS website and just simply search Food Buying Guide, you will come to this page. But first, before we actually look at what the online version is, we're going to talk about the history just a little bit. As you can see, the first, what we consider the Food Buying Guide, was instituted in 1947. So that makes our Food Buying Guide just almost 73 years old. And it wasn't called the Food Buying Guide, it was called Quantities of Food for Serving School Lunches. Of course, at that time, the National School Lunch had been instituted, but not the National School Breakfast Program, the Summer Feeding Program, nor the CACFP programs. It was all about lunches. In 1955, the name was changed to the Food Buying Guide. In '84, not only was it changed to include new products and the new meal patterns, well, they weren't new in '84, but it encompasses all of your child nutrition programs. So the Food Buying Guide is not just for the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program. It's for the child and adult care food programs and the summer feeding. And of course, now the Food Buying Guide, like I said, is still in a book, paper form, online, and our mobile app. A little bit about the Food Buying Guide. First of all, it is a big, very important job if you are the one that plans, purchases, prepares, and serves nutritious meals for the United States Department of Agricultural's child nutrition programs. Every day, you guys out there in the field work very hard to fight hunger and to improve the nutritional health of our students. It says in America, but I want to say in Oklahoma because I'm talking to you guys here in our state. You guys do a fantastic job. And it's whether you're serving just a small number of children, if you're a child care center serving 10 children a day, or if you're in Oklahoma City Public Schools serving 60 to 70,000 meals a day. You guys have a very important job, and part of the food buying guides, what it's here for is to help make sure you meet the requirements. Some questions you need to ask when you're the one doing the preparing and purchasing for these meals is ask, is this meal that I'm going to be serving, is it a meal or a snack? Is it going to meet the appropriate requirements for the variation of the child nutrition programs? What quantity of the raw product is going to be needed to have a ready to cook in a recipe? How much of that is it going to take to make the number of servings you need? How many servings are you going to get from a specific food? And how much food are you going to need to buy? That's a very important question. When you're planning, do you need to buy one can or one case? It makes a big difference uh, when you're doing the purchasing. Some things that are included in the food buying guide, it obviously has all the meal patterns for our different programs. We're not going to dive into the meal patterns today. That's going to be for a different training. But just to kind of let you know what's in there, it has information about the grain items, if it's a whole grain rich product or just a whole grain product. It also talks about the separation of the fruits and vegetable components. If you have a very old food buying guide, more than 2010, your fruits and vegetables are all going to still be in one section. In the newer food buying guides, the fruit and vegetable components, because now they are two separate components in most of our meal patterns, they are separated out. It also has under the vegetables, if the vegetables are in the different subgroups. And what I mean subgroups are the red orange, the green leafy, the starchy, the beans, peas, and legumes, and the others. On the subgroups, your child and adult care food program and your summer feeding folks do not have to make note of those in their meal plans, but it's available to help you if you are looking for a wider variety of vegetables to serve to your program participants. It helps you to maybe see what else is out there and what you can serve. Some other things that are in the most current food buying guides is it contains over 2,100 foods, items, or pack sizes. Each of these foods have been tested by USDA using equipment that you would use in your kitchen to determine the yield factors. It's also packed with lots of information and practical examples that include how to serve, how-to guide to working with your yield data tables. It also contains those meal patterns that I talked about. There's several charts of those. So if you're needing to know what the meal pattern is and you don't want to go to your child nutrition manual or you don't want to go to your CACFP manual, those are all located in this food buying guide. And what do I mean when I talk about a yield? Yield is valuable planning and production tool that helps you estimate the amount of food to be purchased, determine if that particular food item, what it contributes to the meal pattern. This also helps you control cost. It helps you prevent food waste. It also ensures adequate quantity of food is produced. Controlling food costs. Let's go right there for a minute. You guys that are the menu planners and the purchasers, part of your job is to control cost in your food services. One of the best ways is to make sure you're not over ordering, because if you are over ordering, chances are your cooks are going to be overcooking. If you're overcooking, you're going to be spending more per meal than you may have budgeted. And the way to know that is if you're using your food buying guide appropriately, it'll help you to not overbuy. And what am I talking about in the yields? Yields is USDA has actually went in and taken products and carefully portioned them out, weighed them out, using these specific tools to get accurate measures. Someone has actually opened a can of green beans, measured out in fourth cups, more than just one can, to show that that yield is a standardized yield out of a can of green beans. And another example is here on the slide. So if you're going to purchase ground beef to make meatloaf and you're wanting 275 servings and they need to provide 2 ounces of meat alternate, how are you going to know how much raw ground beef to buy? Because we all know when we cook ground beef, it shrinks up. You are not going to get pound for pound out of a ground beef. And we're going to go into a little details on ground beef here in just a few minutes. Meal patterns, I've talked just a little bit about the meal patterns, but all of our child nutrition programs are based on a food-based menu planning approach, and it requires specific amounts to be served daily in accordance with that specific meal pattern. The specific amounts of food included in the meal pattern requirements ensure that program participants receive access to a variety of foods each day which contribute to a healthy diet. The meal pattern requirements for each child nutrition program are included in the food buying guide if you want to go look at them. It also gives information about our grain exemption for this school year, our milk changes that have been instituted, and the meal patterns are up to date. But like I said, if you're using a very old food buying guide, those meal patterns may not be up to date. We do always have the most current as we can get on our CARS website for you school nutrition people. And we also have the food buying guide uploaded in the CACFP resource library for our CACFP participants. So we make those available to you guys to have um, readily available. In the food buying guide, in the first few pages are some helpful hints on using the guide. It gives us information on what kind of common cans and common jars there are, how to substitute one can size for another can size, how to convert some of the measurements that are in the world, such as the metrics to our ounce equivalents, how to change decimals into fractions, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. On the pages in the online version, it talks about the common size jars, the can sizes. Industry terms do not necessarily appear on the label, so sometimes you have to hunt for things. Number 10 cans don't always weigh the same. Like it says, a number 10 can of sauerkraut weighs 6.6 pounds, 3 ounces, and a number 10 can of cranberries weighs 7 pounds, 5 ounces. Who knew cranberry sauce weighed that much more than sauerkraut? But there's both packed in a number 10 can. Some of your number 10 cans in the same exact food item may weigh a little bit differently. It depends on the manufacturer. Our canned meats and fish and shellfish are known and sold by weight, not volume. So the weight of the contents of the can. So those may have different weights, and so they're sold by the weight. What we have on the screen now is actually a page in the food buying guide. I would call it a cheat sheet. It's to let you know if you pull this page out of your food buying guide and set your cans up to it, it would give you a better idea of what size can you have. Same with this slide. If you put the can on top of this piece of paper, you would know if you had a number 1 or a picnic size can. That next circle shows a 300, number 300 can, a 303, which it says they're old cans. We don't see a whole lot of 303s. The number 2 vacuum, and a number 2.5, and a number 3, and then the one with the big yellow circle is our number 10 can. You guys that have been doing food service forever, you know by looking at a can if it's a number 10 can or if it's a number 300 can, what it is. But if you have someone new in your food service, in your kitchen, or if you're a CACFP center and you have a new cook, these might be some interesting pages to have out in your kitchen, because if you start talking number 10 can, someone new may not know what a number 10 can is, and they're just looking at you like, I'd never heard of a number 10 can. So keep that in mind when you are hiring someone new. And in the introductory parts of the food buying guide, there's about 57 pages that have different helpful hints, so to speak. We're not going to go through every one of those, but that would be a valuable tool if you were trying to train someone new in your kitchen. I wish I would have read more in the food buying guide. Getting ready for this presentation, I've probably learned more about the food buying guide than I've ever known. And, you know, you guys that know me know I've been in food service now for about 29 years. So this has been quite helpful even for me to plan this presentation for you guys. So when we get into the nuts and bolts or the meat and potatoes of the food buying guide, how are the foods listed? The foods are listed alphabetically by individual food, broken down into the section. In our section 1, we have our meat alternates. Section 2 is vegetables, 3 is fruits, and as you see, they're separated. So if you, like I said, if you had an old food buying guide, your fruits and vegetables are still mixed. Find you a newer one that has your fruits and vegetables separated. Section 4 is our grains, section 5 is our milk, and section 6 is other foods. What are other foods, you might ask? Well, that would be your condiments, your salad dressings, your spices. That it's a helpful tool for purchasing if you need to know how many number 10 cans, how many servings you can get out of some number 10 cans of ketchup. That's what that section would be most helpful for. The layout of the food buying guide, the paper food buying guide, the book, is laid out in a 6-column format. Online, when we get to look at those, you'll see it's actually an 8-column layout. But the basics of the columns are the foods as purchased, or the AP, servings per purchase units, EP, which stands for editable portions. I can't say that 3 times fast. Purchase units or serving size per meal contribution, purchase units for 100 servings, and then the additional information in the last column. When you're working with the food buying guide, it's going to tell you calculating how much food is needed for a given number of servings. How the foods are purchased. The foods are either purchased by cans, pounds, ounces. When I looked through the food buying guide, those were the majority of how the foods are purchased. You may need to round up when you're calculating how much to buy. And I'm going to show you that example when we look at our baked bean example. But you may need to round down when calculating the creditable amount, because if it's going to be a point something, you're going to want to round down to make sure you meet the meal pattern requirement for that specific purpose. And in the introductory part, and I just went through and made PowerPoints using these methods of how to work with the food buying guide. It's talking about determining the quantity of food needed for a given number of servings. So it talks about method 1, using servings per purchase unit. Well, variation number 1, no conversion of serving sizes needed. And what that means is if you're using a serving size that is listed in the food buying guide, you don't have to do any conversions. That's easy. If you're serving a 1/4 cup of green beans, that's how it's broken down in the food buying guide. There's nothing else you need to think about. However, on variation number 2, conversion of a serving size, if you're going to be using a serving size that is different than what is in the food buying guide, we have to do some conversions. Using purchase units for 100 servings. We're not going to get into that a whole lot here today. That could be for another time. So conversion, if you're using the same serving size in the food buying guide, no conversion is necessary. But let's get into our example of this baked bean. We're wanting to serve some baked beans, and we're needing to serve a half-cup serving size of these canned vegetarian baked beans. And we've purchased some USDA Foods baked beans in sauce vegetarian in a number 10 can. So we're going to look at how many of those number 10 cans will we need to serve those half-cup servings. And on the screen you see we're going to serve, we need to serve 120 half cups. So if you go in and you use your food buying guide, and from the listing you find bean products, dry beans, canned, beans baked in sauce, vegetarian, this is how it's going to be in the food as purchased column. And it goes on to say heated beans that are in the serving size per meal contribution. So we check that serving size, and it says that these beans are served or had been their yield factor completed on a 1/4 cup heated beans. There's no half cup of heated beans in the sauce in the food buying guide, so we need to do a conversion. And I think this goes back to when we think, oh, when we're in junior high and high school and we think we're never going to use math because we're going to work as a chef, or we're going to work as a cook, or we're maybe even just going to be a homemaker, or maybe we're going to be a technology person, and we end up in a kitchen and look on our screen. There's a whole lot of math numbers going on here. So what the book steps that it walks through, since we know that we want a half cup serving and it is broken down into the 1/4 cups, it says we need to convert these fractions to decimals. So 1/2 equals a 0.05, and if you would divide 2 into 1, you get 0.5. And for 1/4, you divide 4 into 1 and you get 0.25. And then it says you have to divide the 0.5 by 0.25 and you get 2.0. Then it says you have to multiply that factor, that 2.0, by the number of servings needed. So we know we need 120 servings. So when you multiply the 2.0 by the 120, you will get 240 1/4 cup servings. In the food buying guide, now we can go in and see for 240 1/4 cup servings. We've got it broken down just how it is in the book. Since the number of servings is in units of a 1/4 cup, you can now use the 1/4 cup to figure out how many we need. And I threw this in here just so you guys could see what baked bean I was using. And you can see in our meal component, it has the meat alternate, the legumes. And these beans could be a meat alternate or a vegetable in the legumes. Subcategory was bean products. The food as purchased, there's where that bean products, dry beans, canned, beans baked in sauce, vegetarian, number 10 can, and it says we can get 47.1 1/4 cup heated beans with sauce. So we go on and look, so we know now we needed 240 1/4 cup servings that you can get 47.1 out of a number 10 cans. And you will take your 240, divide it by the number of servings in the can, which is the 47.1, and that will equal 5.09 cans of beans. So for our 120 half cups, we're going to need 5.09 cans of beans. I sort of say green beans again. Well, you know you can't buy 0.9 of a can, so you would have to buy 6 cans, but you would not necessarily have to serve 6 cans. You might want to make sure you serve 5 1/4 cans of beans to meet your 120 half cup servings. Now this slide was not taken from the food buying guidebook. This is a Dana Parker method of a simple conversion, because we know a half cup is exactly double of a fourth cup. So simply what I would do is divide my 47.1 of my quarter cups that you can get out of a number 10 can, divide it by 2, and come up with how many servings of a number 10 can I could get using the half cup measurement, which is 23.55 half cup servings. Now, when we know that, all I would have to do is take my 120 of my half cup servings that I needed and divide it by the 23.55 servings out of a can. And you see, I still come up with exactly 5.0955 cans that are going to be needed to serve the 120 servings. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, as long as you know you're coming out with the right amount. And when I worked in the schools, one of the things I did, because in school nutrition we normally served on a half cup servings, we didn't do a whole lot of quarter cups. I had went through my food buying guide at my desk and pretty much changed all of my quarter cups to half cups and had it already completed in my book, that I didn't have to do the math every time I wanted to look up an item. Now we're going to switch gears just a little bit and look at the online version of the food buying guide. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a minute, but remember, I'm going to give you a couple hints how to get here without having to use the entire link here on our screen. Because if you go to the FNS website and just search food buying guide, it will take you to this page right here. Once you get here, there's a couple different places you can go. You can go into the Food Buying Guide interactive web-based tool, which is where we're going to spend most of the rest of our time. You can also download the Food Buying Guide mobile app. There's also a handy brochure you can open and print or use for different trainings. If you've watched our webinar and you think, okay, I'm still confused on what I need to do with the food buying guide, or you just enjoy watching webinars, there's several of the USDA recorded webinars on how to use the online version. And then the next webinar is some helpful hints in using the tool. So what we're going to look at is, I'm going to take you through the steps to log in or create your own profile. There's two ways you can get into the food buying guide online. You can log in as a guest, so you don't have to set up a username and password. If you have trouble remembering your usernames and passwords, or you just don't want to take the time to set up a profile, you can log in as a guest. The advantage of setting up a username and password is it allows you to save items in your favorite, do some comparisons. So if you're wanting to compare 90-20, 90-10 ground beef to 80-20 ground beef, you can add those to the compare list, and it compares them side by side, that you're not having to flip back and forth or scroll back and forth. Once you log in, you come up to the home screen. This is the top half of that home screen, and it gives you the options of going to the home, meal components, specific food items, the different tools in the food buying guide, the appendices, and a help button. The help button lists a helpful booklet that shows you how to use the online guide, and then of course your logout. This is the bottom part of that page, and it has our different meats, our different sections. You see our meats, our meat alternates, our fruits, our milk, our vegetables, grain, and our other foods. To me, the best thing about the online tool is you can go search for a food item. You're not having to look through and try to remember, ground beef, is it under beef, is it under ground, how do I need to look for that? So in the search bar, if you simply put ground beef, And I usually leave mine set on all components and all categories. So if you wanted to just put meat alternate in that meal component, you could do that. It would probably speed up the search just a little bit. And of course, when you put in ground beef, you get lots of ground beefs because there is more than just one ground beef. On this slide, I've just shown you a screenshot of the first three that was on the page of the ground beef that I was looking for. And of course, I'm looking for a ground beef that's an 80/20. That is the most common ground beef that we use, and it's on this slide. And I've kind of stretched it a little bit so we could look at it at each column. And if you remember, our columns are still the same: the meal component, the category, the food as purchased or AP, purchase units, servings per purchased unit, serving size per meal contribution. And here you see those two at the end, the add and add. Those are the two separate columns that will let you add to your comparison or add to your favorites. Now, once you find the ground beef that you want to use, as you can see, the way we read this is out of a pound of ground beef, you can get edible portions that are usable portions of ground beef. You can only get 11.8 1-ounce servings. So when you are cooking your ground beef, it's going to cook down. So you would need to multiply how many servings you need by your 11.8 to see how many pounds of ground beef you need to buy for your particular recipe or number of servings. Also in the online version, there was some frequently asked questions, and I thought these were really good, so I wanted them to bring to your attention. How were the yields in the food buying guide determined? And I kind of already went over that, but it said that yield information provided in the food buying guide represents average yields based on research conducted by USDA. It says a variety of samples were procured from different vendors. So they didn't just go get one can of green bean from vendor X. They went and got several different cans. Foods were prepared, portioned, and weighed in a manner similar to what you guys do in your institutional setting. It just says school food service, using the appropriate measuring tools such as scoops, ladles, and a calibrated scale. Now, the next one I find really interesting. How do I determine the meal contribution for a food that is not in the food buying guide? Mandarin oranges are not in the food buying guide yet. Most of us have used mandarin oranges. So you have to find a similar product to figure out the yield for that food. It said, if a food is not listed in the food buying guide, you may choose a food that is similar and use the yield information for that food to determine the meal contribution. And then it gives an example of the pea trindles, which is not in the food buying guide. You would use the information for the watercress, which is a similar food product. And then it says if the state agency approves in-house yields may be developed and used. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever asked our state for an in-house yield to be determined. So if for any reason you would think your yield is coming out different than what is in the food buying guide, you would need to contact your consultant or myself, and we would look at that and work with the vendor and USDA to see if that was correct. And that's what this last question is, talking about the in-house yields in the food buying guide. The additional column, the one that has additional information in it, this is very, very important. The additional information column provides the data used to calculate yields for foods purchased in different form from the form listed in the food as purchased column. To determine the yield information for your food, it must be as purchased form as listed in the food buying guide. So they're going to look at 5 pounds, 8 ounces of ready to cook butternut squash. Well, when you buy a butternut squash, it is not ready to cook. You have to peel it and core out some of the things. So since you purchased the butternut squash and to get it ready to cook, you must do some converting to match that as purchased. So what it says is you need to refer to the additional column for the butternut squash, and it has in there 1 pound as purchased butternut squash is equal to 8.84 ready to cook paired squash. So one of the screenshots we took out of the food buying guide, in that 6th additional column, you see under the squash winter fresh butternut whole, it has that 1 pound equals the 0.84 ready to cook paired squash. And moving on, you have 5 pounds, 8 ounces. So first they tell you they want you to convert those ounces to pounds so that we are measuring and multiplying everything in the same denominator. So 8 ounces converted into pounds, you divide 8 ounces by 16 ounces and you get, it would actually be 0.5. And then you would divide your 5.5 pounds that you need by your conversion, which is the 0.85, and you would get 6.54 pounds. So in other words, you need 6.54 pounds of whole butternut squash to provide 5.5 pounds of ready to cook squash, the butternut squash. Use the calculated quantity of the whole butternut squash, the 6.54 pounds, to determine the yield in the meal contribution of the 5 pounds, 8 ounces of the ready to cook butternut squash you purchased. Now, as we're moving on, what I think is probably even more exciting than the online version is the being able to download the food buying guide on our mobile phone. Because I've never seen a statistic, but it seems like most everyone has a mobile phone anymore. We carry them in our hip pocket, we carry them in our purse, we carry them in our pocket. Most of the time, all of us have our cell phones on us wherever we're going. You simply go into your app store and you look up food buying guide, and it will bring up, it's a free download. The same information can be gathered using your mobile phone as the online version. The good thing about this is you can quickly search for an item. So if you're doing a grocery order and you're at home working, you don't have to go look up the food buying guide, or if you're thinking, oh, I use my paper copy all the time, this is readily available on your phone. So you can go in and search for an item. But the good thing is, if you're the paper person, if you hit the middle button that you see here where it says yield tables, it takes you out to what looks just exactly like the paper copies. Your favorites list up in the upper right-hand corner, once you've saved any of your favorites, they're going to be there. So if you're looking for those, that 80-20 ground beef that we talked about, you hit your favorite list and there it is. You don't have to go type in ground beef and search through all of your food buying guide information. Meal components, a quick button to take you out to your national school lunch, your national school breakfast, CACFP, summer feeding. The meal components are right there at your hand. The more button, it has the information like the introduction, the helpful hints is all located right there under the more. And then of course the appendix for your food buying guide. And it says, I've never tried to email or print anything from my phone, but it says you can. And I would imagine that's as easy as copying anything that you email to yourself in any other program that you have on your phone. It makes it super easy. If you've not done that, I would kind of suspect a lot of you are grabbing your phones right now and downloading the food buying guide. When we've had ABVM and cafeteria managers, I try to bring this out, and most of the people during the meeting grab their phones and do it right then. If you need help doing that, please give us a call. We can help you do that. And like I said, it works just like your online version with your search, your yield tables, your favorites list, your meal components, All of that is listed almost exactly like your online version. The brochure I was talking about, so if you've watched our webinar and you need to train your employees, but you don't want to go through a whole uh, hour, 40 or whatever, 45 minutes worth of training, you want to hand them this brochure. This brochure is printable right there off of the USDA's FNS's website. You can print it in black and white color. It's just a handy guide to have around. Maybe you want to print one of the brochures to have in your kitchen as a quick reference. The other food buying guide resources, the webinar talking that explains the going digital, why they went digital, some nuts and bolts of what we've talked about today is in there. Some of the other recordings are navigating the food buying guide calculator. We did not go into using the food buying guide calculator or completing the recipes using the food buying guides. And we would like to investigate that, but I was afraid that would take too much time for just a quick webinar. Some of the video trainings that are listed, I just pulled that off of the help tab on the food buying guide to let you know what else is out there. Navigating via the homepage button, the food buying guide calculator. And if you can see the dates out beside these, this is when they've updated them last. So they're keeping their information very relevant in the food buying guide. Last that was updated was the training video transcript. It looks like it was updated 8/29/19. The Exhibit A grains tool was updated also August the 29th. All of the information in the food buying guide was updated in this past year. So everything has been updated in 2019. Now, I haven't seen a whole lot of questions come up, but if you have any questions, now would be the time to use the question button and ask your question. We went through quite a bit of information. Any questions? Anybody still there?
I wouldn't see anything either.
All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, you're always feel free to email me, and I will be sending out certificates for an hour of training, along with to all the participants that were on the call. And I noticed some have said there was more than one. I will just send a certificate, and you can print what you need and add those names to that for your professional development hours. All right. Thank you guys very much. You guys have a great rest of the day and a great holiday.